Hello everyone, kia ora. Welcome to our third session in the not-for-profit marketing stream of Unite 2020. Now I can see people are coming in from the waiting room, so really great to see everybody here. So I just have to ask, because it's my favorite Zoom saying, can you hear me out there? Drop me a hello or a woohoo in chat so I know that we're good to go. Let's just see who's out there. Great, Katie's there. Excellent. So good. You got to love a Zoom, can you hear me kind of thing. So I just have to say how exciting and humbling it is to have you all joining us today. If you heard Alicia speak earlier or tuned in yesterday for Change the World, you would have heard the event's origin story, which really only started 5 weeks ago. And it's been a wild ride to get here. Essentially, all of the sessions are free, but we are running a pay what you want system. So if you can send us some green love, please use the link from your invitation email. It will ensure that we keep bringing you these amazing opportunities. Now, we'd also love to get the message out there, so make sure you post some pics of yourself watching the conference online with the hashtag Unite 2020. Over on Instagram stories, so that's the Hancock Creative Insta page, we've posted a Unite 2020 bingo card with things like have an aha moment, download a new app or tool, and it would be awesome to see how many you can tick off your list. And I think we've already had more than 100 people tell us they've been interrupted by one of their kids. So I'm sure we can get that to at least 500 by the end of today. So a little bit about me. My name is Kath, and I'll be moderating a few more of the streams over today and tomorrow. I'm one of Hancock Creative's 5 social media mentors, and I've been working alongside organisations across Australia and in New Zealand, and we help people, causes, not-for-profits with their social media, brand awareness, fundraising, volunteer opportunities to make sure that they hit their goals. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any technical issues during the presentation, please reach out to us by email at wow@hancockcreative.com.au, because we have a tech team there waiting to go. They're on hand and they'll help you out. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Tommy Trout from the Funding Network, who will be talking about how to avoid the 5 most common mistakes when pitching for funding. Tommy is the NFP Partnerships Manager at the Funding Network, where he is responsible for the stewardship of TFN's funding recipients. With over a decade in the international NFP sector, he has worked, among others, for Carers NSW and Wesley Mission, establishing and supporting grassroots community organisations aimed at suicide prevention across regional and remote Australia. He is a passionate innovator and loves to support the growth of disruptive grassroots charities and social enterprises. What an amazing intro CV. I cannot wait to hear what Tommy's going to tell us. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Tommy.
All right, thank you very much for that, Kath, and hello everybody. Like you said, my name is Tommy Trout. The first question you might have is that, yes, that is my real name, and it's an absolute pleasure to be with you here today. Just going to be going through an application, but my presentation, but as I go, if you have any questions, start sliding them into the chat now, and we can get to it at the end, because I've definitely made time for that as well. So without further ado, a little bit about us. So the Funding Network is a live crowdfunding organisation. Essentially, we provide a platform for grassroots charities that are doing amazing work in Australia and overseas. We give them really access to not just funding, but also skills and the connections and resources they need to thrive. Our mission has always been to connect charities, philanthropy, and business and get them all together and get them to convert their passion and shared vision into transformative action. But ultimately, I've always described the Funding Network as a TED Talk meets a Shark Tank meets a live auction. Because we have the presentations like a TED Talk, then we have Q&A like a Shark Tank, and then the presenters leave the room and money is raised for their projects, just like at a live auction. We started in earnest in 2013 and very proud of the impact we've had to date. We are closing in on our 100th live event. We have facilitated over $12 million supporting over 320 not-for-profit programs across Australia and working in Australia and abroad. We've had over 10,000 people attend our events. We've coached over 1,200 leaders, and what I believe to be equally significant, we've made over 2,300 direct introductions. That's where we connect grassroots charities with individuals who genuinely want to meet their charity, learn more about it, and either hear more about their work or support them in a various different sort of ways. So yeah, absolutely amazing. And a lot of work goes into our application. So typically we start with a call for application. We run around 10 events a year. We receive 25 applications per event. Now, with these events, they can be themed. So, working in mental health, kids, or in a specific region, or maybe it's just an open application round, which is also equally common. We get those applications, we apply the essential criteria, and we then arrive at a short list of 6 organisations or applications. That short list of 6 then goes through a due diligence process where we look at the financial information to make sure it's a real organisation that exists, that they've got a track record of work, they've got credibility and capability. And once they've passed that, they then go through to a selection panel. The selection panel is a round table chaired by us, and we'll have event partners and friends of TFN. They'll give phone calls to each of the applying organisations to get to know them a little bit better. They'll ask, what are you pitching for? What's the idea? Get to know the presenter a little bit better. And then they have the unenviable tasks of coming to 3 presenters or finalists who will then go on to receive pitch coaching and then pitch at one of our events. So a lot of work goes into this, obviously, and that's where I come in. So these are the 3 parts where I contribute to the Funding Network's application process. So I am, in a real way, the primary gatekeeper in selection. So I field inquiries, I lead the discussions in the initial round of applications, apply the criteria, and sort of see the not-for-profits through that process, through the finalists. However, this talk is more around the organisations that don't make it through to finalists, and the fact that the Funding Network, we're actually very passionate about the idea that regardless if you're successful or not, we give every organisation that applies an opportunity to receive feedback on their application that is constructive and definitive for them. So we have phone calls, and I'll walk through line by line if necessary, in what way did their application get beat out by others and what they can do to improve. Now, doing that for over 2 years has meant that I've had quite a lot of those conversations, and what I noticed is that a lot of the conversations I have are very similar, and that in a big way, a lot of the applications seem to fall into one of 5 traps or a combination of these 5 traps. And whilst I'm talking from the experience and perspective of the Funding Network, I do believe that some of the things I'm going to talk about are probably going to be useful in your application to any pitching event in a philanthropic sense, because we've noticed that friends over at Impact 100 and 10 by 10 do something similar. And it's also not uncommon now for different foundations and funds to corporates to use pitching as a process to get to know the charity a little bit better, and a way to audition them as well. So without further ado, I will get through the first one, which is also the most obvious, and that is to read the criteria. And by that, I mean read it and then read it again. I appreciate that they're not always the most riveting documents available on the internet, but what they do is they do provide you with actually a lot of clues as to what exactly we're looking for. So not only do we tell you how to self-assess if you're eligible, but we also tell you what exactly we're looking for, and we even give you the specific focuses we have and also the terminology that we're using. So my advice would be, when you're reading the application and the essential criteria, don't just read it once, read it again, make a note of all the things that we're telling you that we're looking for, look at the terminology that we're using, and then don't just address that criteria in your application once, address it continually, repeatedly have everything circle back around to the criteria so that it's a constant reminder to the person reading it just how good a fit you are in the application and for the event that we've got. The second one that I've got is it's not about you. It's about the audience or me. So what this means is that when you're writing an application, I would challenge you all to have the person reading that application in mind. It's about me and what I need to achieve when I'm reading sometimes 2-3 dozen applications in a few days. So when you're doing that, it's always really helpful to ask the following questions of yourself. What is the person reading it trying to achieve? How can I make that easy for him? What questions is he probably going to have? Am I answering those questions? So don't assume any knowledge on my part, and make sure that your application reads really easy and really fluently so that my job is easier and that I understand where you're coming from. So what we do find is that some organizations don't do a good job at that, and they usually will require me to do research, which we can't really do because if it's not on the application, I can't know it. Or they just assume that I know more than I really do, which is probably a bit easy these days. But so my advice would be is to make sure that you write simply, pedantically, clearly lay it out, and always bring it back to the criteria. The next one I've got is to make sure that the funding goal is right. So a lot of the times in these live crowdfunding nights, we have a fundraising expectation, the amount that we're expecting to raise on the night. My advice to you would be not only to have a project that fits that ask, but then give us some more information around the stretch goals of that. So maybe we're raising $20,000 for the night, but what would you do if you got 30,000? What about if you made an additional 35,000? So when you're giving your funding, it's actually really helpful for the person reading it to see you give us a range of sort of price funding options, depending on how much you raise. So for $20,000, we can run this program, but if we raise 25,000, we can do this. If we get 35, we can do that. Another way you could do that is to break down the costs and say that for every $3,000 that we raise, we'll be able to add X, Y, or Z onto the program as well. Another thing to remember is that if you are trying to raise maybe an ambitious amount for the night, let the application know that if you fall short, you'll be able to make that funding up elsewhere. So if you're trying to raise 50,000 and you only get to 40, it's always good for us to know that you've got that $10,000 covered. Because one of the questions we're going to have is, if you fall short of your goals, where are you going to make up the shortfall, or are you not going to do it? We've had applications that have been tried to apply for $500,000, and we've had organizations apply for $5,000. So try and make sure it's in line with what the expectations are for that event. And another tip that I'd give is that when you're looking at any of these live crowdfunding nights, think about, do some research onto their past events. So if it's a Sydney event, have a look at the past 4 Sydney events, look at the amount that is typically raised, and use that as a bit of a guiding principle. Moving on for the next one is to prove the model, or beware the curse of assumed knowledge. I know I've already mentioned that, but it bears repeating. By proving the model, the way that I'd always describe that is think about your theory of change. Normally, with a lot of founders and CEOs of these not-for-profits, they're very close to their program. They live and breathe it. And sometimes the obvious can actually be quite elusive. And so when you're writing out your application, show us the model all the way through the application. Let us know who you're working with, what disadvantages they experience, what you're going to do, what type of program, how you're going to run that program, why you're doing it, and why the organization exists, obviously. And really show us the journey that the people you're working with is going to have. Give us a very obvious model that you're running that makes us believe that not only makes us believe that you're ready to go. Instant program, just add capital. So, and on top of that, it's always good to have measurement and evaluation as part of your model as well. and that the measurement and evaluation should fit the model or the program that you're running. If you're running a soup kitchen, I don't think a 48-page survey on the people you're feeding is appropriate. If you're running a really in-depth mental health program, having no or anecdotal evidence also isn't a great idea either. So make sure that your measurement evaluation fits the model, make sure the model fits the beneficiary, make sure the beneficiary fits the essential criteria and what we're trying to achieve with this application and the funding round. We have had organisations miss out some obvious points when they're applying, like who they're working with, how they're going to get them into the room, how long the program works for, or given us any evidence on why that model is appropriate for who they're trying to work with. So don't give us any assumed knowledge, start from the basics, lay it out, and you really want it to sound like a very obvious solution to a problem I didn't even know existed. You create urgency, and then your project actually then creates a solution for that. Very powerful. And in the fifth one I've got for you is to remind yourselves that you're already pitching. When you're writing an application, I'm reading it like you're pitching to me already. So when you're writing it, it's always really helpful to think, what sort of language are you using to communicate the work you do? What kind of language are you using to describe yourselves? Are you long-winded? Is it overly cerebral? Are you getting my attention? Because I'm reading it like you're already pitching it. So if your application doesn't excite you, it certainly won't excite us. I've had applications that have cited empirical research at length. I've had applications that haven't had any kind of photos or any kind of soul or any mention of the why that organization exists and doing what they're doing. So you're always pitching, and you're definitely pitching when you're applying for it. So think about how you're writing yourself out, how you're introducing yourselves to us. And just remember, you're always pitching, even in the application. On top of that, two other tips that I probably would give you that I hope will be helpful. First one thing I always advise people to think about is to get someone from outside the organization to read the application. So find someone who doesn't know an awful lot about it, get them to read it once, and then ask them, what are the most obvious questions they were left with? Sometimes you'd be surprised how often you leave out a who, what, how, or why. People who don't know an awful, who aren't too close to it, often can provide you the best feedback on your application. So get someone like that, drag them in, make them read it, and listen and find out what simple, obvious questions they've got. And finally, and I can't emphasize this one enough, don't be scared to tell a story. So the Funding Network, we are at our very core a storytelling organization. We utilize storytelling to communicate the mission and impact of the organizations that are pitching at the events. And it's a really powerful mechanism when you're applying to tell us about the work that you do, the impact that it has, and it really does demonstrate to us that you are a pitching storytelling organization. And that's always really powerful and absolutely resonates through when you're reading an application, especially when you're one of 2 or 3 dozen being read. So yeah, never be afraid to tell a story. And some of the most, a lot of our successful applications often do tell a story. And we're now at the point where we've actually made a story a compulsory part of the application, because we do want to see if the organisation have those stories and how they communicate them. So that's it for now. I'm now really excited to actually get to the Q&A section and hear from you guys.
Hi, Tommy, I'm back. That was fabulous. I was busy just scribbling down those tips, and I particularly love, because of what I do at Hancock Creative, is the reinforcing the storytelling aspect. I also particularly love the tip or the idea around checking yourself that if you're not excited about what you're presenting, then how can you kind of expect somebody else to do it or to get involved? So yes, we know our charities and what we do the best, but we have to be opening ourselves up and bringing that passion, the excitement to the application, so that it transitions, into actually getting other people excited about it. So I'm just having a look here. We're getting some comments around about the Thank you, and some aha moments. I'm just going to deep dive a little bit more and see if there's any of the questions in here that people have got specifics around. Some of them are maybe a little bit unique to their situation, and I would encourage anyone who's got something that is so totally specific, maybe to either reach out to Tommy through his organisation, or come through to wow@hancockcreative.com.au so that we can pass it over. Maybe, Tommy, you and I can just do a little bit more of a, while I wait for a few more questions to come in, that are a bit more generic around the situation. Tell me a little bit more about, I mean, we've got the 5 tips about what to avoid or some of the pitfalls, but if I was walking away today and I just took one thing away, what's your, what's the thing that can be a game changer?
I think probably tip number 5 would be the big one for me. Mm-hmm. Is that you're already pitching. Write your application like you're talking to me, or that you're pitching it to me already. So one of the things that I often see, and I'm sure you do as well, Hancock, a lot of the applications we have, they read like copy and paste jobs, that you're just getting a grant application and chucking it in. Write an application like it's to me, and write it like you're already pitching. Don't get it complicated. Don't make it too hard. Give us a really good, powerful, passionate application that speaks to the heart.
Perfect. So do you think you can tell if you've got a cut and paste job, that someone's trying to shoehorn something in?
Absolutely. We can always tell, because it always looks a bit disjointed, and it's just done as paragraphs where they're clearly just hitting 3 things from their website. And it's not, sometimes if I think that's the case, I do go and check, and I'm often right. So.
Okay, so I've got a couple of questions here. Heather has asked, she came in a little bit late, but was wondering whether or not you had any tips for when and getting an application ready when the grant format or the criteria is really dry. It's awful. It's coming from a local government,
yeah.
As an example. So how do you bring your excitement if it's not necessarily, the format for the ask isn't that exciting?
Well, it's certainly a challenge, and a lot of the times in those, especially with council kind of things, they don't really leave you with much room to maneuver, so to speak. So I guess what you'd need to do is, when you go through the essential criteria, the thing I've always done is I read through it and I just make notes on a piece of paper of any words they constantly use to describe things, what is clearly the priority, and then I try and write really powerful, short responses to the questions that clearly address it. But you got to think about the audience. If you're applying to council, you've got to think about what attitude is the council going to have towards that application as opposed to somebody else. So I don't have a council background, so I'm limited in how much support or advice I can give on that. But definitely keep the audience in mind and the council person in mind. That's for sure.
It's a great answer there. Shamara has asked that she's heard that you need to use words or write, like for an audience, a 12-year-old audience, i.e. no assumed knowledge, I guess, and also keeping it jargon free is my assumption. But I hand over to you for your take on that.
I often ask people to explain things to me like I'm an 8-year-old, because you usually just get. But not just because, one of the main reasons why is because it actually forces them to take out some of the complicated language and just give you the core points of what they're trying to say. Normally, with meetings, we have a lot of words now that are starting to lose their meaning. And it's always good just to take things to basics and take things to a more emotional level and just communicate the bare points. Normally, these days, I feel like you can actually cut through by using more sparing, powerful, emotional language than by trying to be overly cerebral or intellectual about it. So writing like they're 12 years old is not a bad way to go about it. Good idea.
Okay. I think Joy's got a question here. Do you have slightly different expectations with a not-for-profit organisation application as opposed to a business with purpose or a sole trader? Like how do you...
What's the difference?
Yeah, what's the difference? Or are you more lenient? Are you looking for something different from different types of organisations?
Not necessarily. There's always a whole list of depends on or maybes, but at the end of the day, what we need to know, as we're a PBI, when we're DGR, we need to make sure that that social enterprise, as we like them to be defined, that the work they're doing has a clear PBI-like benefit in the world, so that they are working with, or the project is for a specifically socially disadvantaged group of people that you are targeting to work with, and that they have positive outcomes. And if the vehicle for that is through charity or business, is less important to us. What's important is that the work is done in a way that is in line with PBI, and in a way that it's pitchable, and that the organisation is sustainable and can build itself on top of that. So,
thank you. I'm muting myself so that the camera doesn't come back to me in between the answers, or while you're answering. So I've got a few other questions because we've got a chat function and a Q&A function. So I'm just popping over into our Q&A section now. So Louise has asked, is there provision for other stakeholders to tell your story as well, e.g. user groups they may have collaborated with, so within your application process?
That's an excellent point. So one thing that we have at the funding network is we have a advocate system. So we ask for each application to include an advocate, which is a non-employee or board member, ideally, to be a part of that application, and that they write a statement of support. And on the night, we actually start the pledging with that advocate getting up, giving a 1-minute testimonial to the work that they do, and then starting the pledging off with a nominal amount of $300+. But you know, if it feels like it's the right thing, or it fits into an application, I would say definitely include a testimonial. If it's a very relevant, powerful stakeholder, it's actually probably not a bad idea to put them in either as a reference or even as a direct quote. So if you're working with, you know, at-risk youth in a certain area, having a note from the local police department saying that we work with these guys, they're great, we definitely support their work. As someone reading that application, that definitely holds weight and does have an impact on our decision making for sure.
That's great. Just jumping ahead here, Hayley has asked if you're able to go back to your slide with the tips on it, if you're able to do that.
Absolutely. Just a minute. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll leave that going on in the background. Kiralee has asked, is there a common theme to the standout successful pitches?
I would say that it's usually around yes and no. So I guess one of the things that they do, they normally grab our attention. So one of the great ways that we like to, the best applications tend to follow a similar trend, where when they're describing their organization, they create a sense of urgency in what they're doing. So the population group or the subject matter that they work in, they then communicate what that is, the impact that has on society, the issue that it creates. And when you're reading that, it creates a sense of urgency. You're like, oh, geez, I didn't even think about that. This is actually a bigger deal than I thought. And then they talk about what their project is, which is at a tonic for the problem that they've done. So they've got problem, solution, urgency, obvious solution. Oh, thank God these guys exist and they're actually doing something about it. So one of our alumni, Missing Persons Advocacy Network, when they did the description of their organization, I didn't even think about missing persons and what it is. I didn't know any of the stats and figures, so I had no assumed knowledge. They didn't give me any, and they set up a real sense of urgency and understanding and empathy in what those people are going through. But then they gave us a program idea, which absolutely nailed and made me feel like, wow, they're really on top of this. They've got stakeholders, they've got an advocate, they've got the program ready, and it made me feel at ease and really excited to put them forward.
Thank you. Joy has asked, do you have, oh no, we've asked that one, I think it is, sorry. Yeah, we have. Let me go back over to chat. Sorry, that's my bad there.
All right. Lots of questions. Either mean I did a great job or a terrible job, so. No,
perfect. Lots of support coming back in saying what a fantastic presentation.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, really great. You know, to look at the pain points, I guess. It's a really great way sometimes to look at, you know, reframe the idea of this is what we've seen that hasn't worked so that people can take and solve those problems and, you know, look at with fresh eyes. So guys, jump in and leave a question, because it looks as if we may have answered all of the ones that we've got through at the moment. So we'll give it another couple of,
So I guess one thing I didn't mention, and I'll talk about now while we're waiting for more questions, is that regardless if it's TFN or not, always ask for feedback on an application. That is the best way to build a relationship with that organization. The feedback they give you is always going to be exactly what you need to work on for the next application, obviously. We had our first online crowdfunding event last week. We raised $188,000 virtually for 3 charities. And one of them, they were on, I think, their 3rd or 4th application and went through the feedback process, I think 2 or 3 times. And by that point, they put in one of the best applications we've ever got. And it was so hard to find a problem with it. They just flew right through to the end and absolutely nailed the presentation as well. So don't ever get disheartened if you get knocked back the first time. Take the feedback, reapply, keep going. That would be a good piece of advice that I'd give for sure.
Great. We've got some more questions through now. Julie's asked, does TFN pick the charities to pitch? Yes. So what we do is, like I said in that process, so we whittle it down to a short list of 6. We then put them into a selection panel, and it's that selection panel that decides who gets to pitch. The selection panel is a group of 7 people chaired by us, but around the table are event partners, our corporate friends who host the event, other matched funders, as well as friends of TFN who might hold an expertise in that area or have a great understanding of the sector in general. And they, together as a collaborative group, pick the final 3. So we're involved, we influence, but it's actually a bit of a democracy in selecting the final 3. Great. Isabel's asked, any tips for integrating important stats or empirical research in a way that is impactful rather than dry? Absolutely.
So great question, and you should definitely do that. So my advice would be, pick what would you consider to be 1 or 2 of the most powerful statistics you have around what you're trying to do. And then when you deliver that, follow that up with what the implication of that is. So if X number of people are going to bed hungry, what does that actually mean in their day-to-day life? So give me the objective stat and then give me the subjective reality as to what that actually means. So if kids are going to school hungry, that means that they're not going to be concentrating in school, which means that they're going to do worse in school and they're going to fall behind. They socially can be ostracized for not having lunch when other kids do. Think about it that way. Give us the fact and then give us a real world application of what that looks like.
That's a really great answer there. Probably got time for a couple more, but here's one that's come through from Louise. Is it worth doing a joint application with another NFP, for example, an arts organisation working with disadvantaged youth?
In terms of joint applications, it depends on, always just put your best foot forward. Sometimes it's better to have a lead organisation. So one organisation, put the application in, they're the ones who will receive the money and they're responsible for the work, but they're going to be working in collaboration with this other organisation or the partner. It does make it easier for us because otherwise I'll need to complete due diligence on 2 organisations, which isn't ideal. And it's easier for us to have one reference or one point of accountability for the funding and the goal. So my view would be choose the strongest organisation, have them lead the project, but having a list or letting us know that you're collaborating with other organisations is always a strong point. It shows that you're connected, it shows that you're collaborative and you're working in the community.
Okay. Joy has got a bit of an example here and maybe looking for some feedback from you. So she's saying that she just did an application to council. It was online with a deadline. And can you talk about the different types of pitching, like in a room? Are there funding live nights? So what does it look like? And she's just saying, just as a bit of a descriptor, is that she's saying, there might be some people who aren't quite sure of what ways that they can get in front of someone.
So different ways that you can pitch.
Yeah, well, so if there's an online pitching component, what are the different ways that, is it just the online pitch for, just say in your example or where you're working, the Word document might come through and then it goes on to that pitching live night. So maybe just take through the actual timeline or steps.
For us?
Yeah.
So for us, we start with a Cognito form. So we have an online application form that you fill out that gives us all the basic information we need We then look at that, we apply the essential criteria, and we arrive, and that open applications is about 3 to 5 weeks, depending on our timelines. We then have we shortlist down to 6. We then have 2 weeks between the shortlisting of 6 and the selection panel. And those 2 weeks is spent completing our due diligence on an organisation. Once we've completed the due diligence at the 2-week mark, they do the selection panel. We pick the final 3, and then they then do a pitch coaching workshop 2 weeks out from that, and then a 3-week lead up from the pitch coaching workshop, where we work with the presenters and a buddy for 5 hours, get to hone their pitch. They've then got 3 weeks to rehearse, do phone calls with us, and then they're there on the night. In terms of timelines, different events or pitching new opportunities are going to have different timelines. Usually, and that's normally dependent around either the organisation, so council typically have pretty bloated timelines around stuff or super rushed, and also usually around the attendance. So the funding network, we normally have 100 plus people, and that normally takes us a few months, obviously, to curate the right room for the event. So we have a lead out time from the call for applications to the event of about 3 to 4 months. But it can be shorter depending on the audience. I know some of the foundations or smaller group private giving circles, they might get you to come in. They might have a smaller lead up time for that. So.
Thank you. And Derek has asked here, with the current situation, the pandemic, would you be more likely to pitch to philanthropic organisations or government departments? Have you got any ideas on that one?
Not necessarily. I think at the moment, council is sort of probably going to have more of a tilt towards the digitisation of your programs as opposed to actual, brick and mortar type programs due to contamination rules. So I think if you want to have an attractive proposition, you'd need to look at ways that you can deliver your program, COVID or not, digital or not. And in terms of philanthropic, I think contrary to belief, there's still quite a lot of philanthropic giving going on at the moment. However, it's definitely going to have a COVID tilt to it. So I think you would be sort of a bit daft to not embrace or acknowledge that in your application, but certainly still put yourself out there. I mean, like I said, we had an event last week and did really well in that. So we've got a lot of hope for the Australian community. And I think if anything, at the moment, people are sort of so sick of bad news and all that going on. They're actually quite keen and really excited to hear about amazing initiatives and what organisations are doing to overcome it and how they can support that. So now's not the time to be shy, I don't think.
I like that advice. It's not the time to be shy. I like it. So let's round out. We'll have one more question here. This is from Rebecca. Will TFN work with charities whose projects are overseas?
Yes. So if your organisation is based in Australia but work overseas, we have had and will have events where you're eligible. So we've had organisations. We just actually did a 6-month report from an organisation that works over in Uganda with young women and their reproductive rights, one girl. So we can and we do. So please subscribe and definitely put in your application. Absolutely.
It's amazing. Okay, thank you everyone for your questions. Tommy, go back to you. Is there anything that you'd like to just final word or anything else? Otherwise, I can move on to what's coming up next.
No, look, thank you so much for everyone's time and attention. Please go to thefundingnetwork.com.au and subscribe to us. You will sort of find out more about upcoming events. You can come check it out for yourself, either as a pitching organisation or as a supporter as well. But otherwise, it's been an absolute pleasure being here with you.
I was that's some amazing advice there. I know I'm just watching people come through, just saying thank you. Amazing advice again. Thanks so much. So it's just great. So we're really lucky to have you join us today, and it's just been a real pleasure to have you. So guys, if you're still out there, we want you to stick around. There's still heaps more to come today. If you haven't selected your next presentation, here's what's coming up. We've got Lisa Sheeran, she's talking around Kickstarter. Michael Duncan is talking about ways to improve your website that can be implemented straight away. Hancock Creatives, Alison Hallworth is talking crisis and risk management, how to have an empowered team for when the inevitable happens. And Donna Moritz is talking about how to be a kick-butt non-designer. She's going to give you 5 ways to quickly and easily create stunning visuals for your business. So we'll end off this stream. Everyone, thank you so much. Tommy, you've been amazing.
Thank you, guys.
Hopefully we get to hear from you again soon at another one of our events, but I'll definitely look out for you guys.
If you have me back, lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, love to. See you guys. Okay, bye.